And you mentioned that you've been thinking a lot about the value of content and SEO channels, specifically for B2B companies. And on Twitter, you recently wrote that SERP wins don't always equal business wins. Converting clicks to leads doesn't happen in a silo or simply because you're first. What did you mean by this recent tweet?
I think there is a belief that still persists in B2B amongst brands where they're looking at the channel and thinking not so much that it's like a coin operated machine, but that it's like, well, look, as long as we can rank first, nothing else really matters. We'll get leads from this and we'll get clicks and this will convert into pipeline and revenue. And I don't think that's how it works. Certainly not going forward, and certainly not if you're really not like working any other channels outside of search or nobody really knows your brand.
Hi, and welcome to the Optimize podcast. My name is Nate Matherson, and I am your host. On this weekly podcast, we sit down with some of the smartest minds in content marketing and SEO. Our goal is to give you perspective and insights on what's moving the needle in organic search. Today, I'm thrilled to sit down with Nate Saienni. Nate is a solo SEO and content marketing consultant. On this week's episode, Nate and I chat about the changing value of content and SEO channels, working with startups, helpful content, and so much more. And this episode of the Optimize podcast is brought to you by Positional. If you don't know by now, my name is Nate and I'm one of the co-founders of Positional. And we just launched our toolset publicly in late March. That means that you can go to positional.com and sign up for our toolset and play around. We've got a trial. We'd love for you to check out our tools for keyword research, internal linking, content optimization, and we've even got a couple toolsets for analytics as well. And you can check it out at positional.com. Nate, thank you so much for coming on the Optimize podcast.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me. Excited to chat and talk about what's happening in the world of search and my opinions on where things are heading.
Yeah, I put together this episode outline a few weeks back, and even in the last few weeks, there's been a lot of change. We've got the AI overviews now, which I definitely want to pick your brain on and get your thoughts about. And also, this is a really special episode because you're the first Nate that we've had on this podcast. So, two Nates. Hopefully, it's a good one. But the first question I want to ask, first question I ask all of our guests is, how did you get into the world of content marketing and SEO?
What a strange trip. I kind of stumbled into this. I was doing front end WordPress development. I'd been tinkering in WordPress and throwing up my own websites since middle school and high school. And I think in my early 20s, I started doing WordPress sites for local businesses and restaurants and stuff. And then they were always asking me hey, can you do SEO? And I was like, sure, yeah, I can do that. I didn't really, I knew basics, but outside of Yoast, but didn't know much out beyond that. So I started doing that, and then it kind of just took off. And I started doing search exclusively and kept working with sort of bigger businesses and brands, and then ended up getting into B2B because I had started working with a startup a few years ago. And I was like, this is cool. I always heard that people thought B2B was boring. I think it's the best. I like B2B search the most. So I was like, I'm sticking with this. So
why do you like B2B search the most? What makes it better, I guess, than B2C search?
I don't want to say one is better than the other. I think B2B is more challenging because you really have to factor in a brand sales cycle and who they're actually selling into, multiple decision makers, multiple different touch points. It's very much not as binary as something like B2C, where for some brands, well, hey, as long as we can rank first, it's a wrap. B2B is much more complex, which can get a little dry, but I think it's a good time.
Well, yeah, I started my career in B2C SEO and, traffic equaled dollars largely. Like the more traffic we had, like the more dollars it equaled. And now doing SEO for the last few years in B2B, I agree with you. It's a lot more nuanced. There's more to the sales funnel. There's more touch points. And I know you and I chatted offline before this recording. And you mentioned that you've been thinking a lot about the value of content and SEO channels, specifically for B2B companies. And on Twitter, you recently wrote that SERP wins don't always equal business wins. Converting clicks to leads doesn't happen in a silo or simply because you're first. What did you mean by this recent tweet?
I think there is a belief that still persists in B2B amongst brands where they're looking at the channel and thinking not so much that it's like a coin operated machine, but that it's like, well, look, as long as we can rank first, nothing else really matters. We'll get leads from this and we'll get clicks and this will convert into pipeline and revenue. And I don't think that's how it works. Certainly not going forward, and certainly not if you're really not like working any other channels outside of search or nobody really knows your brand. I think ranking first is valuable, but I don't want to call it arbitrary. But if we're looking at, hey, we want to rank first in order to drive revenue from this, and it's a B2B brand with a sales-led go-to-market motion, it's not self-serve. You can't just jump right into the product or do a free trial. I don't think ranking first is really like the end-all be-all or sort of like the as long as this happens, then this will happen. I don't think it works like that. And I think people have to start asking themselves, like how they buy themselves. Like, when was the last time you bought something that was a little more expensive just because it was ranking first? We typically align with brands that we already know, not just because a search result page says, hey, this is ranking first, so you should buy this.
I've been doing affiliate SEO long enough, or I did previously, that I don't trust any of the search results for at least a transactional query. But yes, I think maybe that's a good point in and of itself. Like, have searchers do you think searchers have also, like me, started to think critically about search results in that way? Like, do they feel that people could be gaming the SERP for their own brand or product, and maybe it's not as organic as it used to be?
I think that's one of the things. I think there's two things. The first being, yes, I think audiences are kind of sick and tired of the way search content has been, where it's really all just like regurgitated. It's not that insightful. It's all the same stuff that the 10 blue links are talking about. And yeah, I mean, everyone's kind of onto the game of SEO. They know why something's sort of ranking first. Even if someone's not familiar with SEO, it's like, oh, this is what those SEO nerds did. Like they got this result to be number one. So yeah, I think people are cold on that sort of content that's been being published over the years. And then I also think this one is really obvious to me, but didn't hit me until recently. But it's like anybody that's an expert or really experienced in their field or category, they're not really relying on search to learn more about whatever category they're in. They already have their network. They already probably have their sources to go to for information and insights. They're probably engaging with key opinion leaders across social, or they're already directly engaging with brands that they're aligned with. Why would someone who's experienced in a category really rely on search for anything related to that category? Like, if I'm looking for something to learn something about search or SEO, I'm not really going to Google. I'm going on Twitter or Traffic Think Tank or, I don't know, Ahrefs, or I'm texting some of my colleagues who are in search to see what they think. So who is search for if if these audiences who are experiencing a category aren't even really using the channel?
I don't know. Maybe search is for like that person's boss. Like, I don't know. Like the network engineer decides they want a new observability tool set. And it's like they then, you know, pitch it to their boss who doesn't know anything about observability and does a quick Google search and then sees that brand again and says like, oh, okay, maybe this is a real company that we should trust. It does like content and SEO become more of like a brand building or like exercise then if it's not going to lead to like direct conversions?
I think so. Because if people like you and I and people who are experienced in a space, we already kind of have our go-to sources. I think the channel is going to work better for those who are either new to a space and they're starting their journey with like, what is X? What is Y? How to do X? How to do Y? Or decision makers and at a brand who aren't familiar with concepts and might be relying on Google.
I guess it depends on like the sales motion too. Like if it's like a PLG sales motion where the call to action is, you know, start free trial, it might be quite different than like in an enterprise sales motion. And also too, maybe companies that have a PLG motion might be better equipped to serve less experienced users. And so then those actually using search might be better target customers. Whereas if like you're selling to like pure enterprise, it's going to go through a sales motion regardless, then maybe SEO is just like a validation point in that buying process, if anything. I don't know. We're getting very theoretical here. We're philosophical.
It is. And I guess this is what like I keep racking my brain about is, where are things going and how is the channel going to evolve and who is it going to serve best? And how I see things becoming is like search is more of a gateway for newer audiences to be introduced to your brand. If we assume that it's a very small percentage of people who are actually ready to buy, and the vast majority of people aren't really in market, they're just trying to learn, they're just trying to figure out how to do something, then I think that shifts strategies and thinking away from like the channels is going to be a revenue driver. And I think it shifts over to more of like, well, the channel is actually like an audience builder instead, where we can focus on retention and introducing newer audiences to our brand, get them in the door, help them solve their problems, give them an experience so good, they won't really want to go back to search for their next X amount of queries. They'll just want to engage directly with us. We provide so much value. We win trust. We win loyalty. They're aligned with us. That by the time they are in market, we're automatically in their consideration set, or we're the only obvious choice.
Yeah. And I guess we'd need to be really thoughtful about like the call to actions we're using too on those pages. Like in some cases, like, start free trial or book demo might not be the right CTA. Like it might be sign up for our email newsletter or, download this white paper so we get their email and put them into that sales funnel, knowing that it's going to be a longer sales process. And that's often a mistake I see a lot of startups make. Like they use the book a demo like CTA across like every single page on their website, regardless of the stage of the funnel. But to your point about building like just a large top of the funnel group of people coming to your website that have never heard of you before, I actually, the first thing I thought of was ClickUp. We had Jeremy from ClickUp on the podcast a few months back, and I think their blog gets like millions of readers a month. And I'm guessing that's a lot of folks that have never heard of ClickUp before. And they do have like a PLG motion. They also have an enterprise sales motion. But I mean, conversion aside, I think a couple million visitors to your blog each month is probably a good thing and as a brand building exercise.
I think that, and I think there's like a human validation component where I was thinking about this with Notion because I use Notion. I'm not Notion, the biggest fan of Notion, right? So I was looking at like other options and stuff, but I felt left out. Clients use Notion, colleagues use Notion, everyone loves Notion. They have this insane fanatical community. Are you about to say you use Notion?
I don't really like Notion because I can never figure out how to log in. Like I log in and then it logs me out, and then I try to log. It just doesn't work for me. So if someone from Notion can fix that, that'd be great. But sorry, go ahead.
But Notion has this like community, and they've built this brand that is massive, and you kind of can't escape it. And when you're not in it, you kind of feel left out. And when I was looking at other options, I was like, well, shoot, like everyone else uses Notion. What am I missing? Like, what am I not liking about Notion as a tool? And I think that same sort of thinking occurs with other SaaS as well, where it's like, well, the industry uses this. This is just the industry standard. Or like the people I look up to use this. So I just want to use that too. And you're not even really considering, or you may be considering other options, but the brand and the community and sort of that pervasive brand aura is drawing you in. So I think the idea of like me searching for like a knowledge-based tool and seeing Slight ranking first, it's not going to necessarily be the one and only thing that gets me to become a Slight customer.
We had JH on the podcast like very early on, and he was a great guest. And I think you and I both have gotten to know JH over the last couple of years. At least I have. I think he actually connected us back in the day. And he had mentioned it, I think at the time, that like he likes doing SEO for like B2B SaaS companies where like SEO doesn't matter, in the sense that like they've got an actual business, like something's working besides SEO. If SEO works, that's great. But if SEO doesn't work, they're still going to be a good company in business. So that kind of reminded me of like what you were describing. Like SEO could be one touch point for like one of these businesses, but they're doing so much else right, whether it's like brand or another channel, that like I guess kind of what we're getting is you can't be reliant on SEO as like that single source of acquisition. You have to really be everywhere to allow SEO to be like a supplementary source, at least for some of these like enterprise B2B software businesses. Does that sound right?
Yes, 100%. And I've seen both of these scenarios play out. I've worked with brands who were solely investing in search and not really anything else. And I've seen brands who were investing in search and working a ton of other channels and doing like real brand things, podcasts, webinars, really interesting content, social, etc. The one doing all the other stuff typically is the one that's better set up for success. And the one that is only investing in search, I think that's tough. It's like, okay, well, nobody outside the channel really knows who you are. You're going up against much bigger brands that have a much bigger presence. Everyone knows who they are. Even if you outrank these category leaders, they don't know your brand name. Their network uses one of your competitors. How do you think this is going to play out?
As far as like the value of an SEO channel, then, do you think an SEO channel is more valuable for like a very early stage software business, or is an SEO channel more valuable for like a large incumbent player that's already the leader in the space?
I go back and forth. And I think it's too nuanced to give like a yes or no answer, because I work with a lot of early stage startups, right? And I was like, yeah, this is a great thing to invest in. You guys should definitely do search. And as time went on, I became much more choosy and like, this isn't going to work. Like, I can get you ranking and I can drive traffic, but there's so many other missing pieces here that this isn't going to do the thing you want it to do. It's very expensive, and the feedback, the time to actually get results takes a while. Maybe you should focus on X, Y, and Z instead. I go back and forth. Like I don't have a ton of criteria for whether a brand can be successful in search, or like, hey, you guys should be doing X, Y, and Z outside of that. But I just don't think it is what it used to be. And I see a lot of brands that are like, well, we have to do SEO. You know, it's SEO, and this has always worked. And it's like, if we can just rank first, like this is going to change our world, and blah, blah, blah. It's like, okay.
We're about halfway through this episode of the Optimized podcast, and I just want to give a special shout out to our sponsor. You might have guessed, Positional.com. Check out their awesome set of tools for content marketers and SEOs. And now back to the podcast. Yeah, speaking from past experience, like I think you and I have joked before, talked before about my experience building like a Kubernetes blog. At one point in my life, I was in the Kubernetes space. Thank God I'm not in that space anymore. But like we competed against Datadog. And like the number one keyword for me was like Datadog alternatives. I was like, you know what, if we can be first for this keyword, like that's going to be awesome for us. We're going to acquire a whole bunch of customers from it. And we did. We like got to number one for like Datadog alternatives. And I drove a lot of traffic, but people still didn't want to like use our product, probably because they'd never heard of us anywhere else before. But
so
you go ahead.
Go ahead, please.
No, I'm curious to get your thoughts.
Okay, what you just said is exactly the thing that I think is happening. And nobody seems to be talking about this or coming to terms with this. And I think because if people really start to ask the hard questions about this, like, is this stuff working? They're not going to like the answer. And I think there's a lot of SEOs out there who don't want to confront this reality because it means that the very thing we've been doing, whether it's for 20 years or 5 years or 10 years, the value of it has started to diminish, and it's going to force people to have to pivot. And I think that maybe makes a lot of SEOs uncomfortable. So they'd rather not sort of ask those hard questions about whether this stuff works. I was just thinking about this yesterday. I think I tweeted about it too. Like the whole concept of like bottom of funnel keywords first and like go at like versus pages and alternatives pages. I have done this strategy so many times. And yeah, I can get that content ranking and it gets clicks and stuff, but it does not drive, in my experience, it has not driven the results that I think the broader industry has believed it to drive, where it's like, well, if we get all this competitor content published and all these versus pages and these buyer guides, it's going to drive a ton of pipeline because they're in market, they're ready to buy. This Ahrefs is telling me that this is a commercial intent keyword, so it means that person's going to hand over money. So we're going to target all these keywords. And I don't think it works like that.
At least we're having like an honest conversation about the value of SEO channels. I feel like on Twitter these days, like it's just like complainer world. Like I was saying to my co-founder, Matt, like I can't even go on SEO Twitter right now because it's just like people complaining. It's driving me nuts. And I was joking with Matt. I'm like, you know what? I kind of hope SEO finally dies. So all these complainers are out of a job. But like, I'll take us back to the outline. I promise. So
I think that's a great point. I have felt the same exact way, where it's like what I'm trying to do is just get ahead of the problem and figure out what's the next evolution of all this. I'm not going to sit there and go the way of the dinosaurs because I'm just like staring at Google, like, tell me what I have to do next. It's so reactionary. I really don't care about these algorithm updates. I'm trying to figure out how to leverage these evolutions, whether it's related to Gen AI or ChatGPT or Perplexity, and figure out where Google's going and how to just evolve and adapt. And I think, I don't know, tweeting all day about the algorithm updates and stuff, I just don't see the value.
I've had to mute like so many people because I wasn't following them, but Twitter just like kept trying to show me their content. I was like, finally, like, I don't want to see it anymore. We won't name any names on this podcast, except for Forbes. We always like talk crap about Forbes, but as a website, but that's deserved. Anyways, so you said something earlier which I thought was quite interesting. You said that like you want to give that searcher such a great experience when they land on your website that they don't feel like they need to go back to Google. They can just come back to your site and get like everything that they'd want to know or learn or share with their boss about a given topic. And like at Positional, like we work with a lot of startups, and like startups tend to want to publish a lot of content very quickly that often isn't very engaging. There's nothing really new that they're adding to the internet. It's often quite boring. And I say to them, I'm like, if you drive traffic to this page, is anyone even gonna remember that they read this piece of content on your site? But you know, I want to ask you a question, like what in your opinion can we do as like content marketers to deliver like that fantastic experience with that first piece of, you know, content or first web page that someone lands on? Is there anything we can do?
This is something that, I've been facing more and more. I think one of the first things is getting buy-in. I think just like you said, I think a lot of startups believe that we just have to create a bunch of content, get it ranking, and that'll do the trick. And I think if you start asking them hard questions or talking to them about like, look, we have to like create an experience here. We should be creating like really engaging content that may not work for search, but we can leverage in other ways to sort of increase retention and engagement. We should consider like creating templates or process docs or decision-making frameworks that help ICPs. And we should offer those things, once we're getting this traffic from organic. And I think all of that conceptually sounds like a lot. And it's like, oh, shoot, like what? Like we have to do like all of this stuff. And it's like, yes, we kind of do. I mean, I think some don't have to, but I think for some other startups, yeah, you do have to do that. And I think getting buy-in for that is really important first. Beyond that, though, the things that are completely in our control is I think if we start working with startups that have a wealth of existing content, that kind of greases the rails quite a bit, where you could have a brand that like has a ton of blog posts, right? And it gets really good traffic, but the CTAs are all like, book a demo, get on a sales call, get on a sales call. And it's like, this isn't going to work. But you have a ton of like webinar content. You have a ton of ebooks or white papers or these templates or whatever, video content. It's like, let's get rid of the CTAs here and start layering in this other content that's really valuable within these pieces of content that are harvesting all this organic traffic. It's like you're getting all this traffic, but they're just leaving. You're not really sending them anywhere and you're not providing a ton of value. Why don't we try to keep them so they don't leave? So I think when a brand already has a wealth of content to work with, that's great. When you're starting from zero, I think it's very difficult.
I don't even call it SEO content anymore. Like it kind of hurts me when people call it SEO content. I just call it good content these days. And like, are we trying to build an SEO channel at Positional? Definitely. But like the content that we create serves so many other use cases in our business. Like if you look at our blog, I know JH would kill me. He'd be like, Nate, why did you write an article about H1 tags? And I'm like, because my customers ask me about how to do a good H1 tag all of the time. And so I wrote that blog post to give to them as like a resource. And it just so happens to be ranking on the first page of search for H1 tags. Great. But like when I think about the content we create, like is SEO like the primary use case? Like it could be, but like there's also plenty of other use cases for the content that we create. And I don't know what with your customers, do you find that like the SEO content they're creating is just for SEO, or are they trying to find other ways to use it?
I've seen the sentiment going around recently, especially on Twitter, of like SEO content should just be like good content. Like there's no such thing, like there shouldn't be such thing as SEO content. I get it. I do. In some cases, though, you kind of still have to play the game a little bit. And I think depending on like the writers you're working with, the brand's sort of messaging and vision and stuff, sometimes content that could really work for search isn't because that content's like, I don't know, over editorialized or the angle just like doesn't match search intent well. So I think sometimes with content, you still kind of have to play the game, but there's a balance. It's like, look, if we have this topic we want to rank for, but we can take two tracks with it where it's like, look, we can get this piece of content matching search intent well, kind of following what Google wants us to do with it. And if you want to go in this other direction that I don't think would work in search for this topic, we can still do that and kind of marry the two pieces of content. If someone lands on that SEO optimized quote unquote blog post, we can kind of layer in this more editorialized one. So I think it's a case by case basis. I think sometimes you're still kind of forced to play the game if you want to get on page one. And other times you can kind of get away with going in a different direction. I've seen both work. I've seen both of these work where I've worked with a brand. The top 10 results for a keyword weren't that good at all. And we wanted to kind of go in a really different direction and present our own take. And it was a risk. So all the top 10 results were going right. We were like, let's go left because I believe in this take and we can the brand can take a position on this sort of topic. Let's do it. And we ranked. Not number one, but I think like fourth or third. And I have also seen cases where you have content from a brand that kind of goes in a little bit of a different direction and does not perform in search. I think it's I don't think it's binary. I think it's a case by case basis.
That's such an interesting observation. Yeah, my standard advice is don't go against the grain. Just like do what the top SERP results are already doing in a slightly better, more interesting way. But don't fundamentally go against the grain. It's usually my advice. I saw one of your tweets recently. I thought it was pretty interesting. I actually flagged it. I've got it in front of me. You said that you like content optimization tools, but brands bake these tools into their content processes to the point that any and all content must be optimized for a keyword. And you went on to say that this is so arbitrary and a slippery slope and requires undoing dated thinking around content, SEO tools, and the channel. So I guess my question here is, do you think the proliferation of content optimization tools has actually been a bad thing for content marketing teams?
Yes, depending on their belief about SEO. If you give a tool to 10 different people, right, the tool's going to do the same exact thing. The tool's function cannot change. It's more so how someone approaches the tool and their preconceived notions about search and SEO and the channel. There are content marketers out there that know getting an A+ in ClearScope is kind of like whatever. And even achieving that A+ is going to end up going in the opposite direction of what you really want. You're going to end up diluting the value. The content probably won't be that good in some cases because you're plugging in all these suggested NLP queries and stuff like that. Whereas there's other content marketers or other writers who will approach ClearScope and say, okay, well, if I plug in all these keywords, it's going to rank for all these keywords. So let's plug in these keywords. And I think content marketing managers who are kind of overseeing these processes, if they believe that search is just, or SEO is just this keywords-based sort of lever to pull, they too will have that same sort of mentality where it's like, we have this piece of content, we have to include keywords or we have to target a keyword with it. And that's what ClearScope is telling us. So let's do that. And I think that's a slippery slope because not every piece of content is going to perform in search. Not every piece of content has to work in search. We have distribution. How else can we leverage this content? Instead of sort of relying on these tools that exist today to end up Frankensteining these articles just to fit some keyword.
We have a content optimization tool at Positional called Optimize. And I think the reason that people like content optimization tools is from like a management standpoint. It's easy for like a boss to buy one and then give it to their employee or team and say like, oh, you need to get an A. And then they're kind of outsourcing like the quality control process. So they're outsourcing their job to a content optimization tool. I think so bosses like to buy them. I think writers like to use them. Some writers hate to use them. Like I've talked to some of my favorite writers. Like will never use a content optimization tool, but some writers really love them because it feels good. Like you get an A, you feel like you like checked a box and like you've got a good score. You did a good job. Like pat myself on the back. Like I think a content optimization tool can be dangerous because at times. And I'm a person who's selling one, but I think they're dangerous for the startups that like put out a very vanilla piece of content. Because like content optimization tools don't tell you if your content's actually any good or not. They just tell you if you've built something that's like fundamentally similar in structure to what's already ranking well. And so like a lot of startups will like put out something that's like very extremely boring and low quality, but it gets a high score in a content optimization tool. And then they're confused as to why it didn't rank well. And like, so content optimization tools often like fail to capture the actual quality of a piece aside from structure, keywords, things like that. I guess the way that I use a content optimization tool is I use it at the very beginning in my outlining process to get like a general framework together. But then I also use it at like the tail end. And I often like, instead of trying to like force keywords in, I try to use the keywords to like, force me to find areas where I might be able to go deeper to make like a more helpful piece of content. I don't know. I should stop talking. I'm supposed to be interviewing you.
Here's the thing though. You do this. You do this stuff every day and you've been doing this stuff. So you know how to approach those tools and the channel and content. There's a lot who don't have those guardrails in place or a process doc that's sort of shaping their approach to tools that exist in content optimization tools. So the only inputs they're getting are from the tool. And just because you get 100 or an A or anything, like you said, it doesn't mean that content is good. So I think you have to put guardrails in place so that people understand the tool is just a tool, and you still have to approach it with nuanced thinking and not forget about the human element to all of this.
I'm going to ask you such a tough question. All right. So imagine like I'm one of your clients and like I've just gotten an A in a tool like ClearScope, or I've just gotten 100 in Positional, but my article isn't ranking. And they go to you and they say, Nate, like I've gotten the A+, but my article's not on the first page. What do you say to them? And I get this question like once a week, so I have to ask you.
Did they just publish this?
So that's often the case. Yes. So sometimes that happens, like 3 days ago. But I guess like what would you tell them to? So say they published it like 3 months ago and it's not ranking. Like what would you tell them to do if like one of these articles got a really good score in a content optimization tool, but it's not ranking well yet?
I don't know. I'd probably ask them to get out of my way so I can figure out how to fix it. No, I would not say that. You'd have to do two things. You'd kind of have to explain that, just because ClearScope is X doesn't always mean the outcome is going to be Y, right? And if you can sort of change that perception a little bit and mold it into the way you want, that can sort of stop some of these questions from occurring and stuff. Secondly, I would just look at the article and say, okay, well, what can we do? It's been a long enough time. Let's see if we can change this. Maybe the search intent changed, or maybe we can update this in some way. Maybe we can insert a couple keywords in here. I would try to look at it together or provide some feedback. But what would you do, Nate?
This is a really hard question, and I get asked it all the time. So like, let's assume they're doing a lot of other things right. Like they've done the internal linking right. They've picked a good primary keyword. They've hit it clearly in the H1. Like, I think most often it's because the content is really like there's nothing exciting about the content. Like usually, like it's very boring. It feels like kind of like I'm reading like a Wikipedia page is a lot of the time. And so usually the advice I would give is like, what can we do to like add something to the internet with this article? Can we add like a helpful graphic? Can we add like a helpful video? Can we add some expert quotes? Can we add like an expert insight that you didn't find on Wikipedia? Like, what can we add to this article to make it something new to the internet? That's usually my advice, assuming they've done like all of those other things right. Like they've written a good H1, they've done internal linking, they've done a lot of the baseline stuff correctly. But then last thing I'll say before I'd let you chime in, sometimes there's just randomness in search too, right? Like you never know. Like 1 out of 5 articles just might not rank that well. And some like people don't believe that when I tell them that, but that's kind of been my experience over my career. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there, Nate.
No, I like hearing your takes on this. It's a nice back and forth. Well, here's the other thing. Like the briefs I create for writers have sort of those inputs and direction in where it's like I try to get them thinking beyond just, hey, write about this topic. So in the briefs I create, it's like, we touch on information gain a little bit. And it's like, what does the brand have anything unique to say about this? Like, what can we say about this that would make someone care? Like, why should someone read this instead of whatever else is ranking? Can we layer in any other content? Can we layer in do we have any, can we source quotes from other experts? Can we add video content? Do we have white papers? Anything like that. So that when they approach a draft, you're sort of covering those bases on the front end. So it's very much inputs, outputs. In terms of like the 1 out of 5 don't rank, I'm not sure if I have like I can probably see that. If I think about all the content that I've ever helped ship that was intended to rank and take a percentage of like what didn't rank and what did, yeah, I'm sure a good percentage didn't perform. If it were that easy, we'd all be ranking.
Also too, like sometimes Google is like, is random in the sense that like when we publish an article at Positional, sometimes it like hits the first or the second page right away. And then we'll have other articles that we've published for like 4 months and like Google didn't pay any attention to them at all. And then all of a sudden, like one day Google just starts paying attention to the piece of content. We didn't do anything differently. And I like try to describe that phenomenon to people and they like look at me like I'm a crazy person. I guess until you're like in the weeds of actually seeing that, it's hard to describe it. Like sometimes you didn't do anything wrong, but Google is just not paying attention yet. I don't know.
100%. I think like Google has that period of time where it's like if you put something new out there and Google's crawling your website at a really good pace, sometimes you can see that land on page 1 or just outside of the top 10 really quickly. And then like a week goes by and it drops out. Google's still evaluating where they want to serve this up in search results. And then maybe it pops back up again. But honestly, I ship the content and then I kind of pay attention, but not really, but kind of do.
That's an interesting point. Like I just ship the content and then I don't worry about it for like 2 months. But then there's other SEOs that like ship the content. They want to know instantly what it's doing. And I'm like, I don't know. I don't really care. I'll find out in 2 months.
If we're shipping content for the first time, I like to pay attention immediately because it's a good indication of like where we stand. If we're going like 0 to 1 with a content program for a startup and we start putting content out there, I'm looking almost every day because I want to see like, okay, if we can start getting this stuff on the board immediately, that's a good indication of what could happen in the future and where we stand in terms of getting future stuff on the board. But if we put content out there for the first time and it just sits and it's not ranking well at all, that's a bad sign. And that at that point, I start looking at some other things in terms of like, okay, well, are we going to need backlinks or like, do we just be patient? But being able to get things on the board immediately is always a nice is always a nice win and an indication of like how much juice you have to keep doing that.
You know what? Let's just like go straight to the lightning round because I have like 15 lightning round questions. Are you ready for it?
Yeah.
All right. So like you just mentioned backlinks. Like how important are backlinks today? Is this something you worry about with your clients?
Not really. Yeah, backlinks. I mean, gosh, sometimes they matter, sometimes they don't. I don't do them. Do they matter? Sure. Is what it is.
And I want to ask about like clients. Have you ever had to like fire a client? And if you have, like, why? What did they do wrong?
Have I ever had to fire a client? Not, no, I don't think I've ever had to. And I'm glad I've never had to.
As far as like working with clients, I imagine that like I know you work with a lot of startups. I imagine they already have like website by the time they start talking to you. Like what are one or two of those like big mistakes from an SEO standpoint that you've seen them make over and over again before you start working with them?
SEO mistakes?
Yeah.
If they've already put out content, it's like totally not aligned to the product. I've seen some wild stuff where it's like they have this tool, they've published content on the site, and it just has like zero to do with that tool or their customer. And it's like, okay, so you guys are just like going in Ahrefs and seeing these random keywords that have a lot of volume. And it's like,
oh, yeah. You know, I was talking to this like developer tool company the other day, and they like sell to like DevOps teams, like help them handle like reliability issues. And, you know, they had a piece of content on their blog about like best holiday shopping gifts and trends. And like, but they tried to make the argument to me that like during the holidays, you know, these websites, there was a lot of demand on them. And that's when like critical issues could happen. And so that's why they created it. But it was literally, you know, it was like a gift guide. And I'm like, huh, I guess maybe.
yeah, that's the stuff that like I'll when I drop in and I start looking around, I'm like, okay, this is not gonna work, guys.
So I know you mentioned Perplexity. I would love to have the founder of Perplexity on this podcast. He's happy to come on because I think he's kind of a jerk. At least he's got to stop talking smack about Google. All right, I'll ask the question instead of giving you my opinion. But would you rather, if you had like $100,000 like gifted to you, and you had to invest it in Perplexity at like I think it's like a $1 or $2 billion valuation, but you couldn't touch it for 10 years, or would you rather put that $100,000 in Google stock at a $2.2 trillion valuation? You can't touch it for 10 years. $100,000 in Perplexity or Google stock?
I don't know. I mean, Google's like a safe bet, but like, are they even good at like shipping products anymore? Like,
well, they have those AI overviews now. Those are pretty exciting.
I'd probably dump it into Google, but I don't know.
He's dumping it in Google. Okay. Because on this podcast, people say it depends a lot, but you didn't say it depends. You said,
I mean, if this was a real scenario, not a hypothetical, yeah, I'd have to like do my homework and due diligence. But for the sake of giving you an answer, I'd probably, I guess I'd go Google.
Google. All right. Yeah, lock it in. We'll check back in 10 years and see what happened. We'll have you back on the podcast, episode number
1000.
I do want to ask you about the AI overviews. You know, we probably could have talked about AI overviews for like 15 minutes on this pod. But like high level in 2 minutes, what do you think about the AI overviews?
The same way I think about like the helpful content updates and EAT and stuff. Or I guess it's double. What do people call it now? Double EAT or double EAT? I mean, I lump all that stuff together. It's not on my radar. I mean, I've seen it pop up. Like half the searches I did yesterday, I saw the AI overview pop up. I think it's probably going to eat into traffic share for top of funnel keywords, but it's basic stuff. And it provides the links, the citations,
That's an interesting point. So Google said, I think in their testing, that these AI overviews actually send more traffic to publishers. Do you believe them?
Not sure I care. Ooh, I know that that might seem harsh, but yeah, it's not something I'm too concerned with right now.
Do you think people are gonna like be tracking their like, you can get like featured snippet tracking with like a whole bunch of rank tracking tools. Do you think people want to track their AI overview rankings?
They should want to, because I know that I'm looking at with clients I have right now, I'm checking to see if Perplexity is sending any referral traffic, which it is, and I think that's really cool. And for some clients that are getting traffic from Perplexity, it's to blog posts that aren't ranking on page 1 in Google. So it's like, okay, well, this is interesting. Why is Perplexity surfacing this that's not performing well in organic? So I think people should probably approach AI overviews the same way. Try to figure out like how it's compiling these answers and track that traffic from it.
Yeah, I can't wait for like the first like content optimization tool for AI overviews. I'm sure like everybody and their brother is like working on it right now. Do you think that's even possible? Can we even like try to optimize our content for the AI overviews?
I don't think you can optimize your content for any of these things. And I see a lot of people putting out content or prescriptive sort of guidance on like, this is how you can optimize for LLMs and this is how you can optimize for stuff like that. And it's like, well, we don't exactly know yet. It's still all a little theoretical. Do I think in like a year, 2 years, 3 years, whatever, that we may have a better understanding? Sure. And do I think there's going to be a flood of tools out there, people selling courses on how to do it? 100%.
Well, Nate, this has been so much fun. How can our listeners buy your course?
It's $49.99, and yeah, guaranteed to drive millions of dollars in revenue.
Well, I'll be buying it, and
it's on Gumroad. I think it's on Gumroad. Last time I checked.
That's wonderful. Like I heard, all of their employees work for like 5 hours a week. Nate, this has been so much fun. And by the way, for our listeners, Nate doesn't have a course, but he does have a LinkedIn and a Twitter. And we will include links back to Nate's LinkedIn and Twitter in the show notes. Nate, is there anything else you want to say to our listeners?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter, LinkedIn, and yeah, that's about it. I appreciate you having me on. This was fun.
Yeah, we tried to keep it interesting. We veered off the script for 80% of this episode. So I had a lot of fun. You're welcome back anytime. Thanks, Nate.
Awesome. Appreciate it. Thank you, Nate.
Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of the Optimize podcast. This episode was brought to you by Positional. At Positional, we've got tools for content optimization, keyword research, internal linking, and so much more. We'd love for you to check Positional out at positional.com. And you can always reach out to me too if you have any questions at nate@positional.com.